Don't forget, you can reach the latest episode of Potomac Watch anytime. Just ask your smart speaker, play the Opinion Potomac Watch podcast.
From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Welcome back. This report, quietly published in December, is titled Prohibited Extremist Activities in the U.S. Department of Defense. It is by the Institute for Defense Analysis and was commissioned by the Pentagon in 2021. Let's listen to a clip of Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin discussing this subject in February of 2021 in a U.S. Army video.
The truth of the matter is, we need your help. I'm talking, of course, about extremism and extremist ideology. Views and conduct that run counter to everything that we believe in, and which can actually tear at the fabric of who we are as an institution.
Kate, can you give us a sense of what this report found and a little bit more context on what prompted it?
So after January 6th, the riots at the Capitol, there were several members of the active duty military who appeared to be involved, and it created a rather large frenzy about whether the military was a breeding ground for rioters, domestic terrorism, and the like. And so it created this huge search to get some idea of whether the military was producing extremists. So Lloyd Austin, among many actions, ordered this independent study on the scope of the problem of extremism in the military. That was in 2021, and now it's been kind of dumped out a back door quietly without much fanfare. And the reason for that is what's in it. And what's in it suggests that the members of the U.S. military are no more likely than other members of society to hold extreme views or engage in what could constitute extremist activity. That, by the way, includes a huge range of ideological bent, of behavior and other conduct. So it's not simply what we read about so frequently, which is that the military has a white problem, a white nationalist problem, or that particular brand of extremism. It looked across multiple data sets to try to get an understanding to what extent this was a problem in the military. It looked at court-martials, for instance, and found that what it could dig up of court-martials, there were 20 since 2012 that involved things that could be constituted as extremism, but that also included gang activity, which most people don't think of as political extremism. And once you took that out, the number of court-martials fell to 1 per year. So I think the reason this isn't getting much attention is because it did not produce the desired narrative and show that the military has a real extremism problem. If anything, it pretty much showed that the military doesn't have such a problem, and what few cases exist, it has better means to punish that behavior than society as a whole. So this should be good news, but it's not being received that way because there is a group of progressive activists who are really invested in this narrative of extremism in the military being true.
For more details, this is a 262-page report if listeners want to go find it and learn more. But Kim, this result is probably unsurprising to Americans who know normal, everyday, patriotic Americans who are serving in the military or have a background in that. One thing that I think is notable here is it represents a low share of the United States compared with previous generations. In earlier generations, I mean, everybody knew somebody who had served in the military in World War II, in Korea, in Vietnam. And we've gotten to a point with the all-volunteer force now where it is a share of Americans who are doing that, but not what it used to be. And often multi-generational households where someone decides to sign up because their dad or their grandfather was in the military. Maybe the way to say it is that it seems like there is a bigger divide between people who are familiar with that way of life and people for whom that seems like a long distance. And I do wonder whether that's a problem going forward if broader society does not have experience with what it's really like day to day in the military.
Couldn't agree more, Kyle. And it's a growing problem. And I think helps explain part of that frenzy that Kate was talking about is that we do have pockets of America and areas of America where the military is still more prevalent, but those geographies and socioeconomic areas are increasingly cut off from vast numbers of Americans who are completely clueless about the military, how it operates, doesn't know anyone who's in it. And that's the point here is there would have been a day when the very thought of what came out of Lloyd Austin's mouth or the frenzy that Kate described that was going on, people would have laughed about because they would have all understood the way the military works, which I think is a really important subtext of this report, which is that one of the great things about the military is it has a good culture that tends to guard against that kind of extremism, in that what unites many people in the military, makes it a fighting force, is this devotion to duty and honor and country, which are ideals that supersede other impulses and other ideologies. And I think it's just notable, too, that we're talking about this given the early part of our discussion and the lack of such a healthy culture at our universities out there. Because don't forget that our military is often full of a lot of other young Americans, those who may not be going to Harvard, but who are indeed going into the service to carry out those ideals of duty and honor and country. So, I mean, I think this is a little bit of a wake-up call. Reading it, it isn't necessarily a surprise to some of us. The fact that it is a surprise to others ought to be the more alarming takeaway of this entire episode.
Kate, we'll give you the last word, but here is a statistic from the Pew Research Center. The share of the U.S. population with military experience has declined. According to data from the U.S. Census Bureau, in 1980, about 18% of U.S. adults were veterans, but that share fell to 6% in 2022. So from about 1 in 5 Americans being veterans to about 1 in 20.
Right. I mean, there's no question that the military has in some ways siphoned off from society at large. Though here, I think there are some other details that are worth discussing from this report, because go back to January 6th, for instance, which was this high-profile incident that seems to have started this narrative that the Marines are some sort of Praetorian Guard. Even on January 6th, this report found that of 700 federal indictments, fewer than 10 were on active duty or in the reserves and military at the time. So military members were not overrepresented as January 6th defendants even. What people who push this narrative tend to fall back on are, well, extremism, broadly defined, is growing among veterans. And this report purported to find some small and very questionable increase in veterans who are affiliating with extremism, okay? And this, again, the data on that is very mixed. But even if you were to concede that, and I don't necessarily, what is the Pentagon supposed to do about civilian behavior among those who have left the service and who are no longer under their command? I think there is no role for DoD to be playing in folks who have been outside the military for 15 years. That is, I think, one thing that gets missed in this sort of swirling everyone tries to do to try to say anybody with a military background must have been radicalized during their time in the military. I think it's helpful to see here that's clearly not what's going on. The military itself, to Kim's point, has a good culture, has an ability to keep people from the political fringes by uniting them in a common purpose. But in general, to the extent our society is atomizing and people are spending more time on social media, the Pentagon does not have a particular role to play in that cultural trend. But again, this really should be good news that the military is holding up well in a very polarized America. You would think that this would bring a lot of relief. And what instead it has brought is the coverage of it is basically, well, the study should continue until the extremists are found. The interest in extremism is really outstripping the availability of the extremists. So that, I think, is really unfortunate, is that it continues to be this drive to swirl all these topics together and to continue to find outlier examples, because, of course, there are bad actors in the military like there are all over society, to continue to raise these profiles as larger than they really are. And what that really, I think, is concerning about is that over time, people lose more confidence in the military. We've seen some trends in that direction already, both on the right and left. The right concerned that it's been overcaptured by woke ideology, and the left now thinking that it's a hotbed of extremism. And I think both of those views are overblown, and that it's really just regrettable that we allowed for 2 years a public narrative that really wasn't true about extremists in the military to take down the public's belief that this is a good, non-political institution.
Thank you, Kate and Kim. Thank you all for listening. You can email us at pwpodcast@wsj.com. If you like the show, please hit that subscribe button, and we'll be back tomorrow with another edition of Potomac Watch.